Reptilians, welcome and welcome back to the channel. So this week we are going to do a video that I sort of did about 2 years ago. I did one very similar to it called my thoughts on cohabbing, but this week instead of just talking about my thoughts on it, we're just going to kind of talk about cohabbing in general. We're going to talk about the dangers of it. We're going to talk about when it's okay, if you cohab, what to look for as warning signs that something might not be right, reptiles that can be cohabbed. We're just going to talk about a little bit of everything. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by the Doobia Dude, so make sure to stay until the end of this video to find out how you can save 10% off of your entire order at thedoobiadude.com. Let's get started. Really quickly, before we dive into it, what is cohabbing? For those of you that are new to the reptile hobby, you may not know what this means. So basically, cohabbing is just keeping multiple animals in a tank together. So this could be keeping multiple of the same animal together, or it could be keeping different species together in a tank. We're just going to talk mainly about keeping multiple of the same animal together because that is normally what people immediately go to and what they're immediately looking for when they get their very first lizards. That's what we're going to focus on. So yeah. Next section, the dangers of cohabbing. So again, if you are new to the idea of cohabbing, a lot of people agree that most of the time this is dangerous. And that is because in general, again, not all species, most species of reptiles are not social animals. In the wild, reptiles are very competitive. They are very territorial. They look at all other reptiles or other animals for that matter as competition for their resources. So the dangers of putting these animals together, number one is malnourishment. Usually one of the lizards or whatever will be more malnourished than the other ones. They could have metabolic bone disease. And usually that means that's because the other one was more dominant and so they are taking those resources. Which leads us to resource hoarding. Again, the dominant one is going to try to hoard resources, whether that be hoarding a heat pad, hoarding a basking spot, hoarding water, taking all of the food, anything like that, and obviously that leaves the other one malnourished. Stress, of course, is going to be a big one if you have two animals that don't want to be around each other and they are forced to always be around each other, then of course they are going to get stressed out. Injuries can occur when they decide that they don't want to be near each other anymore and they start to fight, or one is bullying the other, and of course injuries could lead to toe or limb loss or infection, which have to be treated with antibiotics, and worst case scenario, it could lead to the death of one of your animals. With bearded dragons, if two bearded dragons don't like each other and they decide that they're going to fight, they are going to fight to the death. If you have two animals that are cohabbed and one is significantly larger than the other, a lot of times the bigger one will see the smaller one as food and they will eat them, especially when we think of things like king snakes. King snakes cannot be with other snakes because the bigger one will eat the smaller one. This is a worst case scenario, but it is one that happens, unfortunately. So let's say that you have decided that you are going to take a chance and you are going to cohab your animals anyway. Unless you are an expert in these animals and you are going to provide a lot of space and all the things that both of those animals need, I highly advise against this. But if you are going to do that, of course, make sure that there are never more than one male in a tank. Preferably, in most cases, it is better to have multiple females. And you need to do a whole bunch of research and know what it is that you need to look for in these animals. So let's talk about some of those things and what to look for. Number one is cuddling. If you see that your reptiles are always snuggled up against each other, especially if we look at things like them being snuggled up on a heat pad or on a basking spot, this means that they are fighting for that resource. This is especially true if you see that one is laying on top of the other under a basking spot. Whichever lizard is on the top, they decided that they want the sunlight and the one underneath them does not get the sunlight. And of course, that will lead to the one underneath not being able to digest their food properly. If you are cohabbing animals and like we just talked about, one is a lot bigger than the other, that needs to be fixed immediately. In that situation, the bigger one is going to be the more dominant one and the smaller one is unfortunately unfortunately probably going to become malnourished if not food. If you were to notice that one of your reptiles is always on the cold spot, or they are always as far apart in that tank as they possibly can be, then that means that they are not getting along. Just talking about dominant signs in bearded dragons because it is the easiest and it's the one that comes to my mind. Bearded dragons, when they are trying to show dominance or show that they are submissive to the other one, they will do things like head bobbing. The submissive one will wave, basically saying, I understand that you're the boss. Puffing up and putting a tail up, especially things like leopard geckos. If you notice one is trying to make themselves look bigger, that's not a good sign. And then just any kind of normal stress signs. So that might be not eating, it might be black lines under a belly of a bearded dragon or a black beard on a bearded dragon. Even though we talked about it already, it may be them just hiding all the time. Any sign of stress that they are constantly exhibiting isn't good. If you notice random injuries popping up on these animals, again, that means that when you're not looking, they are nipping at each other or biting each other. And if you notice that one is suddenly bigger than the other, one is growing much more than the other, or one is looking very skinny and they look like they are losing weight, that is a giant red flag that one of those animals is resource hoarding. So when is cohabbing okay? Because sometimes it is okay. One of the biggest places that you may see cohabbed animals often is at zoos. And this is possible for zoos for a couple of different reasons. Number one, zoos have vets and zookeepers are trained professionals, which means that they are able to check these animals to be sure that they are not putting 5 males into a tank together. Number two, they have giant enclosures and they're able to provide them with multiple heat sources, multiple basking areas, multiple places where they can get food, multiple water sources, and very importantly, a whole bunch of hiding areas so that these animals can get away from each other even in these huge tanks if they need to. But most of the time, those animals are able to stay together because they are given the proper things to make that possible. Cohabbing tiny baby animals together is usually okay. This is why you will see at pet stores and at breeder locations, things like that, a whole bunch of babies in one area. It's because at that point, they're not very aggressive. It's not as bad as it is when they are adults. Right around the time a reptile becomes an adult is when they're going to start really laying on the dominance. And of course, certain species, it is okay to keep together. So if you are dead set on wanting a tank with multiple animals in it instead of just one, maybe look into these upcoming species. So let's talk about reptiles that can be cohabbed together. This is obviously not an exhaustive list. If you can think of any social reptiles that like to live together that I don't list here in a minute, definitely make sure to leave those below. Please don't say things like bearded dragons because you knew someone that kept 2 bearded dragons together for 3 years. We're talking about actual social reptiles here. And the biggest one is garter snakes. Garter snakes are very social. They live in big groups in the wild. These guys are awesome. And with garter snakes, really quickly, let me gush over them for a minute before we get into the rest of the list. With garter snakes, they don't only eat rats, so you can feed them other things like minnows, for example, which is so cool. Prehensile-tailed skinks are a big one. The issue with this one though is that prehensile-tailed skinks already require huge tanks, so keeping multiple of these together is going to be a little bit more difficult, but if that is something that you want to do, that is also a possibility. Green anoles. Green anoles are one that I kind of talk about often because you can get them anywhere and they are very inexpensive. These guys can live together in tanks. You just have to make sure again they have the appropriate amount of space and that you don't have a bunch of males in there. No more than 1 male to be exact. Turtles! Of course, turtles. They need a whole bunch of space, but turtles can live together and they are fine. Crocodile skinks. Crocodile skinks are very shy, they are very timid, but they can live together. And crocodile skinks are one that actually do better in a male-female pair, which is super interesting because most reptiles in male-female pairs, the female will eventually get stressed out because the male will keep trying to breed, but crocodile skinks actually do better in a male-female pair. So that is a super cool one. You guys know I love crocodile skinks. And mourning geckos. Mourning geckos are really cool because you can just keep a bunch together, and for the most part, they are going to be good. You do have to worry about babies, even with all female colonies. So that is something to keep in mind. But yeah, they're really cool, and you can do amazing setups for them. You can do bioactive setups for them, and they aren't really a hands-on sort of animal. So it's cool that you can set up a big tank for them, have some in there, and always be able to watch them. Very cool. And a couple of quick honorable mentions, even though they are not reptiles, are axolotls and dart frogs. Both of these are things that a lot of reptiles keepers keep, so I thought I'd throw them in. And they are things that can live together. As with any animal that I just mentioned, if that is a route you decide to go down, you still need to be careful, you still need to monitor them, you still need to look for all these things. It's just those animals, it's not as normal for them to hate each other than it is for things like bearded dragons. But that is it. That is all I have for you guys this week with cohabbing. Hopefully I convinced you to either not cohab something that you might have wanted to cohab, or to be very careful in your already cohabbing situation, or to look into other animals that you could get in order to cohab. Hopefully you took something from this video. I'm exporting my footage and realized that I forgot to do my ad read. So, as I said at the beginning of this video is sponsored by the Dubia Dude. The Dubia Dude is such an awesome place to get feeder roaches for your animals. Dubia roaches are super nutritious. They are healthier than crickets. They have a lot more protein than crickets. They do not carry parasites like crickets do, and they stay alive, which is such a big plus. It's always super cool to be able to buy a bunch of feeder insects for your reptiles and not have them die on you. The Dubia Dude's website is super easy to navigate, just a couple clicks, and you have Dubia roaches coming directly to your house, and he offers subscription services, so you can just set up a subscription service for him to send you Dubia roaches and not have to worry about it anymore. They'll just automatically come to your house, which is super cool. Make sure to check out thedubiadude.com and use my code Elle at checkout to save 10% off of your entire order. Thank you so much to the Dubia Dude for sponsoring this video. As always, if you have not already, please feel free to follow me on my other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday and some Wednesdays. This week's Instagram shout out goes to Acorn the Dragon for following me on Instagram and going through and liking a whole bunch of my stuff. And huge shout out to Boss Gamer, who has been watching me for a while now, and I hadn't heard from you for a little while, and then you commented on Wednesday's video. So thank you so much for all of your support and sticking through the channel for such a long time. Thank you guys both so much. You are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Are new to the reptile hobby. For those of you that are new to the reptile hobby, you may not know what this means. Oh, Jesus. So when that happens, you until a reptile becomes an right. Okay. Okay. Maybe even develop things like metabolic bone disease, or why are you not focusing on me?